JC said that would be gross and did not disappoint. Thank you. So yes, as some of you may know, I've been on book tour, and the book party will be at Book Market at the East End Market Courtyard this Friday night from 6 to 9. I also have books here tonight if you'd like to get a copy, but if we run out, please do come by, or even if you get a copy here, please come by the book party and hang out on a Friday night. All right, Juventud, what do you need to know? The book is narrated by Mercedes Martinez, who is a teenager in Colombia in 1999. During the excerpt I'm going to read here, and all you really need to know is that she has fallen madly in love with an impassioned peace activist named Manuel, who also is a badass guitar player, and her father really isn't very happy about that. Manuel and his bike flew like a black fly along the valley road. The gate opened and the bike coasted into the courtyard, its rumble reverberating off the stonework and mosaics. It was Friday night. Manuel had ridden with his guitar case strapped across his back, something he didn't like to do as it wasn't safe, but he had reluctantly agreed. He swung the case down and stretched before he wrapped his arm around me. "Ready for the evening's adventures?" he whispered. The maids had set the table for 6. Manuel extended his hand to Poppy. "Thank you for inviting me back. I'm afraid I put you off last time, without meaning to." Poppy said, No, all is forgiven. Please, sit down. Tonight is all about music and good times." Underneath the table, Manuel squeezed my leg, searched for my fingers and clutched them hard. Fidel strolled in, claimed the seat across from Uncle Charlie. "Captain," Uncle Charlie said in greeting Fidel, who improvised a quick salute in return but flashed red and stared down, embarrassed. So they knew each other. Fidel had served in one of Uncle Charlie's little armies, if not under his direct command. I was waiting and hoping to see how Uncle Charlie would introduce himself to Manuel, but when they shook hands, he stuck by the nickname. I declined the aguardiente, the potent grain alcohol too much for me, but Manuel poured himself a short glass. Inez set down 2 crystal serving bowls of ceviche, one of scallops and the other of shrimp. "Ah, the real Peruvian kind," Uncle Charlie cried, "soaking it overnight in lime. That's the secret. Not like the slop they serve in these cheap places with ketchup and mayonnaise." "I am Peruvian, remember?" Inez patted his shoulder as she passed by. "For you, only the best." Citrus and fresh cilantro wafted up, mixed with the honey aroma of dripping wax. Luis lifted his plate, Uncle Charlie the ladle. The clear juice and pale chunks of seafood pooled onto plates. Manuel said, "Shall we say grace?" Uncle Charlie folded his fingers together loosely and glanced at Poppy, who set down his fork and did the same. Fidel bowed his head and sat up straight. Luis slouched and shut his eyes. Manuel recited a quick thank you to God. "I look forward to playing tonight," he said, picking up his fork. "I apologize beforehand if I'm rusty, but I've been distracted by other obligations lately, as you know." "What a coincidence, so have I," Uncle Charlie said. "But that is always the case. Sometimes I dream that I am alone on San Andres Island with a volume of Mario Benedetti's poetry in one hand and a beautiful whore in the other." Luis and Poppy chuckled at this, although Fidel didn't even crack a smile. "My apologies if I've offended you," Uncle Charlie said to us. Manuel smiled, tight-lipped, and raised his brows. "My brother is studying for the priesthood, not me," he said. He took a bite of ceviche. "Your brother, yes. What's the latest?" Uncle Charlie said. "The FARC killed my father when I was a young man, you know. To think you can't sit down at a table in this country without everyone having suffered some tragedy. All because of these cowardly thugs." The men chewed and stared down in silence. Luis cleared his throat, his face somber. He shoveled ceviche into his mouth, gazing off. The sun sank orange into the mountains. So he'd lost someone too. Maybe he acted boisterous and aggressive because he didn't know how else to deal with it. I lifted the water pitcher, offered him a glass. "Sorry to hear that," Manuel said. "What do you do now?" "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to say." Uncle Charlie sipped his drink as if it was a fine wine, patting his mouth afterward. You might say I work behind the scenes. Right now, I'm tackling the problem you're facing, but from another angle. I never realized Mercedes had an uncle, Manuel said. His elbow brushed me, pressed into my blouse. Are you American, from her mother's side? Luis and Fidel burst into laughter at this, and Poppy and Uncle Charlie chuckled under their breath and exchanged a private look of amusement, the way I had seen Manuel and Emilio share glances. Poppy smiled behind his folded hands. He's not really her uncle, he said, but Uncle Charlie is an old, very good friend. I hope you don't mind me asking this, Manuel began, but do you see a path for peace? Or should we just forget it? Fidel's eyes appeared glassy, already midway through his second pour. The million-dollar question, he said, for the million-dollar man. Silence fell. Luis sucked down ceviche. I halved a scallop, and the slippery white flesh shot across my plate. Poppy glowered at Fidel. Had the remark been intended as an insult? Uncle Charlie asked, Do you read, Manuel? Sure, mostly theological books by Catholic writers and activists. Oriana Fallacia, Dorothy Day. But you don't read literature? Poetry? Fiction? Not really, he replied. In literature lives the heart of the human being, even more than religion, Uncle Charlie said. Don't get me wrong, I go to Mass. As he spoke, he popped shrimp between his lips. His teeth appeared too big for his mouth. Everyone sat up waiting to hear what he would say, myself included. Our great writer Garcia Marquez has said that Colombia is in the midst of a biblical holocaust, and I believe he has it right. There are only 3 outcomes that can result from violence. One side will win out eventually and rise to power, or the sides will get tired of fighting and killing and drop their weapons. Or lastly, the fighting will go on, fed as it is by the gringo appetite for drugs and the larger corrupt interests of the multinational corporations and U.S. government, until we have killed each other off, every last one. But which do you think is going to happen? I asked. I took a teeny sip of Manuel's aguardiente and coughed. Do you think I know? Uncle Charlie cried. I want peace, but at the same time there are economic realities. We must defend ourselves, our families. His fist drummed the table. Isn't that playing both sides? Manuel asked. If you play both sides, you never lose, Poppy said with a shrug. Ask the Americans. They've been doing that for years here and all over the world. Their citizens don't even notice. They're too busy getting high on our coca, Luis said. Exactly, Uncle Charlie said. And yet when we protect our farms, we're criminals? He and Manuel began to argue about the Americans' latest role in the drug trafficking. Poppy wandered to the humidor. I took another sip, throat burning. How are your displaced? I asked Poppy. What's this? Uncle Charlie interrupted. Poppy offered each of them a cigar, passed around the cutter. Only Manuel declined. Poppy lit off a candle, slowly savored the first toke. He resumed his seat with legs crossed and touched his bandana, freshly pressed, in his shirt pocket. There's a camp in the lowlands past the cane. I've let a few dozen displaced stay there in exchange for working the fallow fields. More like 100, Luis said, staring at the end of his cigar. And you will have more, Uncle Charlie said. That's good of you. St. Diego, see what I'm talking about? He looked at us, but reached over and thumped Poppy on the shoulder. That's very kind, Manuel said. He toyed with the cutter. So you believe in faith in action? What other type of faith is there? Poppy said. I wish I could offer them more, but we all do the best we can, don't we? A twinge of mockery hung on the words, quickly eclipsed by his suggestion that we move into the living room for the guitar show if Manuel was ready. Manuel sat before the fireplace, patted the place before him for me to join. As he strummed, the valley fell more deeply into darkness, except for the glittering stars and scattered lights of small farms. Soon the Jefes arrived, each stooping to fetch a beer at the mini-fridge Poppy kept stocked on the patio before ambling in. All wore guns at their waists. Uncle Charlie waved in his bodyguards. His reddish face turned even darker with the blood rushing to his capillaries. Should we wait for the girls? He slurred. The maids darted about, collecting glasses and emptying ashtrays, and the dogs cavorted and barked at the Jefes who tossed toys for them. The men leaned in the doorway and against the couches. Wiry Vincente, rolled cigarette hanging from his thin lips. Guillermo, with the high cheekbones and indigenous features of Inez, ceviche piled onto his plate. Fidel, the youngest, sulky from too much drink. Uncle Charlie, or both. Luis, who laughed a lot but adjusted himself and poked his head outside to spit in the lawn when he thought no one was watching, and Uncle Charlie, the latest addition, who now sat in Poppy's chair across from us with his hands clasped upon the arms and his feet flat on the ground like a gentleman about to watch an opera or a king, all of them different versions of Poppy. Headlights flashed and gravel crunched underneath tires. The maid threw open the front door. A half-dozen women pranced in. One wore the highest heels I'd ever seen, her shimmery camisole straining to cover her augmented breasts from the wrinkles in her cleavage. She appeared to be the oldest. Another wore jeans so tight that the crack of her backside peeked out the top. A dainty tattooed tree frog leapt beneath the strap of her hot pink thong. She paraded around like a cat, proud of her sleek, thick tail. The prettiest had straight black hair that swung down her back, and a beauty queen smile that gleamed when she sidled up to Guillermo and stole a forkful of ceviche off his plate. No doubt she knew the tricks Anna knew, how to rub Vaseline on your teeth and coconut oil in your hair. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. "I hope you don't mind," Uncle Charlie said, "but I called some friends." He spoke sloppily, swept his arm toward the bar where the women poured one another aguardiente. Poppy loitered in the kitchen, talking to Inez as she scrubbed. Manuel pinched my knee, and I flushed. "Who are they?" I whispered. "Who do you think?" he scoffed. "Prostitutes." Then he began to play. Everyone fell quiet again. Poppy hurried over and slipped into the chair beside Uncle Charlie, face smooth and fixed upon us. "Putas. Did my father go to bed with such women? And was this the kind of behavior that had driven my mother away? What was the relationship between Poppy and Charlie for this bizarre old friend to waltz in, bunk with us for however long he liked, and order prostitutes at his leisure? Manuel played for about an hour, intricate classical pieces, lively rumba numbers, plus his own compositions. When the most recent round of applause died, Manuel took my hand and said, "I wrote this last song for the love of my life." Whistles and murmurs erupted. Poppy shifted, chin in his palm and his other hand clenching the bandana. Manuel played a new song he'd sung for me once in the brothers' bedroom. The faces remained still under the soft lamplight, the maids and Inez standing in the back, arms folded. Fidel hastily wiped a tear. Guillermo stared down into his drink, entranced. As the last notes reverberated, Uncle Charlie looked like he'd just closed the covers of a wonderful book. "You have inspired me to double my efforts against the ELN on your behalf," he said. "My brother Carlos and I were going to record this month," Manuel said. "He arranged the guitar in its case, but that's all been put on hold until we get Emilio released." A thick cloud of perfume filled my nose and mouth. The prostitute with the enormous breasts hovered over Manuel, praising his performance, Vincente behind her, extending his hand, grinning and nodding enthusiastically. His other hand rested on the woman's lower back, her skin too tan even in the dimmed light. Guillermo and Luis crowded around, and then the others. Only Poppy and Uncle Charlie remained seated. That's when Uncle Charlie leaned over to Poppy and whispered, "You weren't kidding about his talent or his potential." Potential. I stood there, passing around Manuel's CD and meeting the women's envious glances, straining to hear my father's reply. "Que encantador," the pretty one with the shiny teeth said to me, tilting her head toward Manuel. I complimented her tacky purse, pretended to listen as she prattled on about where to get designer knockoffs. Did Poppy view Manuel not as a threat, but someone he might win over to his employment, like Fidel? I backed closer to the couches, but heard nothing more. When at last I broke away, Uncle Charlie had left. I started to breeze past Poppy, but he caught my side. Tears glistened in the creases of his eyes, bandana crumpled on his knee. I grabbed his other hand. "I love you so much," he said, voice trembling. He squeezed my hand so hard that it hurt. "I'm sorry I'm not a better man." "You're fine," I said. "I love you too." My throat tightened, and to my surprise, I said, "Like you said, we do the best we can. Thank you.